3, 2, and 1.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gila Rajai, and welcome to the first session of the Strategic Webinar Series. This is our third year of presenting this series. I am one of the recent graduates of the Transforming Chaplaincy Fellowship Program, and currently a student at the University of Michigan in their PhD program in the School of Public Health. I am honored to be a part of this process with George Fichette, who is an advisor and mentor and leader of this Strategic Webinar Series, and has been doing so for the last 2 years. And we're continuing to do this alongside the Transforming Chaplaincy Project and ACPE. As you all know, this series has helped us to develop leaders and help people as they begin to advance the work of chaplaincy within different professional spheres. And we want to really look at this as how do we come at this as professionals and clinicians and really meet our counterparts in the healthcare industry as equals. Today, we'll be talking about developing leadership in chaplaincy management and a look to the future. And our presenter is Andrew Garman and Daniel Kim. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the two of them. Our respondent today is Amy Green, and she'll be sharing a little bit of reflection and discussing with Andy and Daniel about some of their findings from their research of looking at chaplaincy management competencies, but also the work that Andrew has already done within the National Center for Healthcare Leadership and their models and competency for healthcare leadership. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenters today. Andrew Garman is a practitioner and scholar, and he splits his time between Rush University's Health Systems Management Program and the nonprofit, the National Center for Healthcare Leadership, whose mission is to improve health by strengthening healthcare leadership. In support of this mission, NCHL, which is the National Center for Healthcare Leadership, operates a portfolio of organizational collaboratives that over 150 health systems and graduate programs participate in from across the country. Andy is the author of several dozen peer-reviewed papers and book chapters, as well as 4 books, including The Future of Healthcare, Global Trends Worth Watching, and Exceptional Leadership, 16 Critical Competencies for Healthcare Executives, which was recently released in its 2nd edition. He received his PsyD in clinical psychology from the College of William and Mary, as well as an MS in human resource development from the Illinois Institute of Technology and a BS in psychology with mathematics concentration from Pennsylvania State University. Joining him is Daniel Kim, and Daniel is currently a 2nd-year PhD student at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, studying Health Services Administration. He received his undergraduate in psychology at the University of Michigan, which is where I'm at, great place. While at Michigan, he worked as a research assistant over at the School of Public Health and is currently working as a research assistant in the Health Services Administration Department as well. The two of them will be our presenters today, and our respondent, as I said, is the Reverend Dr. Amy Green, and she is the director of the Center of Spiritual Care at the Cleveland Clinic, a health system of over 12 hospitals and more than 4,000 beds in the greater Cleveland area alone. She has a team of chaplains, holistic nurses, family liaisons who help patients, family, and staff deal with illness, stress, death, and bereavement. She's a clinical assistant professor of spirituality and medicine at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and the Cleveland Clinic Learner of College of Medicine. She's been an ordained clergywoman with the Alliance of Baptists for over 30 years, has worked as a chaplain and chaplaincy educator for over 20 years, and she came to the Cleveland Clinic in 2007 to become the director of their training program and became the department director in 2013. She holds a Master's of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University in New York and a Doctorate of Ministry from Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit. She currently serves as a board chair for the ACPE, the Standard for Spiritual Care and Education. And though she's a native Southerner and a 40-year resident of Atlanta, she enjoys being on Lake Erie, and she's been happily married for 35 years and the father of 2 grown sons. And we are glad to have all 3 of them here today. As you all may know, this session is being recorded and will be available at a later date. And so we'll be going through today and having Andrew and Daniel share, and Amy will get a chance to have some reflective time on their presentation. And then we will have a time for Q&A at the end. If you do have questions, you can notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see an area that says Q&A. Feel free to put your questions in there, and we'll be working through those as we are able at the end of the session. So at this point in time, I'd like to kick us right off and say, Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's certainly an honor and a delight to be with all of you today. We're going to take our first attempt at the technology we have before us by, I think you're going to pull up the slides for the session. Okay, and I've got a split screen going that a colleague of mine helped me put together. So I'm going to just move everyone's face over to the other screen so I can see what everyone else is seeing. And then Gail, do I tell you when to forward, or is that something I can do on our behalf?
You can just let me know and I'll move them forward.
Okay, terrific. Well, again, really appreciate everybody's time today. What we're hoping to do over the next maybe 30 minutes is introduce some topics. And really, it's an introduction. We want to start a conversation with all of you. Our hope is that we have some things that resonate with you, that you say, yeah, that sounds important and we ought to take a closer look at it or have a dialogue about it. Or maybe you say, gee, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Can you give me a little bit more background and help me understand where you're coming from? So my understanding from George is of the various things that I ran by him that I might talk about today, the area that he thought would be of greatest interest to the folks who have been participating is this perspective on the leadership or this perspective on the future of healthcare. So the National Center for Healthcare Leadership has done some work in what we'll call Future Scan. What I'm going to do is describe that process and then describe the results of that process. I'll spend just a few minutes on each of four what we see as macro level trends that will be important to be aware of and to think about in terms of an adaptive response. After that, we'll spend a few minutes talking about the National Center for Healthcare Leadership's leadership competency model. This is a model that is designed to be relevant across disciplines. So it's got a clinical aspect to it, but it's really hoping to become a universal translator, if you will, something that any clinician or any administrator can use to start a dialogue about what we need to be developing as leaders and how we might move things forward together. At the very end, then, I'll ask Daniel to say a little bit about the work that he's been helping George and I with, taking this model and applying it in the context of chaplaincy leadership. He's been volunteering his time, and we're grateful for his contributions because this is something that's very important to the work we're doing with transforming chaplaincy related to preparing future chaplaincy managers. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll do a quick commercial. I'll try to keep it brief. Really what I'm trying to do is build a little bit more credibility with all of you in terms of where I'm coming from. I like to think of psychology as somewhat of a cousin profession to chaplaincy. It's different in its own ways, but a lot of what we're trying to accomplish on behalf of the folks that we work with, there shares a lot of overlap. So I have a lot of interest in chaplaincy as a profession. I've known George for decades, so I was just so excited for this chance to work with him and work with your profession in a deeper way, given all the exciting work happening in transforming chaplaincy. So on this slide, you can see a little bit about the Health Systems Management Department. This is where I work. It's a department at Rush. We're just across the street from George. We've been putting a lot of time and effort into becoming nationally recognized, and that's so that people can find us and come study with us. It's a practitioner-teacher model, which means the folks like me all have practice roles. So we have a lot of emphasis on what's going on in healthcare right now and how do we take that back into the classroom. The quick couple of things I'll point you to. The Leadership Academy for Healthcare Transformation is something that we ran for the Illinois Hospital Association for a number of years, and it informs some of the ways that we approach management and leadership development today. And then in the very lower left corner, you see a Future of Healthcare text. This is something that we published in 2011, and the methodology that I'm going to talk about in just a minute comes out of this text. And if anybody on the call is interested, in a copy of that. You don't need to run out and get the book. Just send me an email and I'm happy to send you, it's Appendix A out of that text that describes this methodology. It's something that we put together with Tom Royer. Tom is a physician that used to run a system called Christus Healthcare, which is an international system headquartered in Texas that also has facilities in Mexico and several other countries now. So let's go ahead and proceed. Thank you. So the how we go about looking at the future, there's actually a systematic process that we walk through. And the first step of it is to look at everything that we can find that's been published in the area that's sometimes called scenario planning. Scenario planning is a methodology for looking at what are sometimes referred to as hard trends. These are trends that are relatively robust. They should be somewhat immutable. I'll give you a good example. Demography ends up being a hard trend in the sense that we know today how many 18-year-olds there will be 18 years from now because they've all been born. And it's impossible to accelerate the aging process in a way that would change that demography. If you look at hard trends like those, physics, environment, some of these types of things, you can start to create a bit of a picture of what we know versus what we think is going to impact our future. So the slide that you see here lists some of the resources that we tapped into. It also lists some of the foci that we took a look at, but basically the methodology involves summarizing what the various scenarios are telling us, and then distilling out what we refer to as future facts. These are statements about the future that are somewhat on the more robust side. We then look across the scenarios to see what is that picture that is drawing a common thread across these various scenarios. And even if it's not a hard trend in the sense of physics or in the sense of demography, if a lot of folks are talking about it, if it's a general consensus opinion about where we're going, that focus starts to shape reality in some important ways. In other words, if we all think a market is going to go up, or if we all think an organization is going to do well in the future, that optimism in and of itself is somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think is another good way of thinking about it. So these are the sources of information. You can see from the foci, we did not focus specifically on healthcare. Some of these foci relate to healthcare, things like culture and the systems and what's going on in the professions. But a lot of this is that wraparound. What are the trends in education, demographics, workforce, technology, and the like, so that we get a full and complete picture of what's happening. And in a country like the United States, where about 18% of the gross domestic product is tied up in the healthcare systems, this is really important because whatever affects the broader sociodemography of the United States is going to affect healthcare. Next slide, please. So now I want to say a little bit about each of these 4 trends. And again, if I leave you with any questions, that's by intent. And if you look at anything and you just scratch your head and you say, I'm not sure that makes sense to me, my hope is that we get to talk about that some here in a few minutes during the Q&A section. But our first trend is something that we're calling enhancing capacity for adaptive change. And the quick dive into this one that I might point to is the impact not just of technology in the broadest sense, but the impact of technology enabling the creation of other technologies. What started to happen, especially in the last 10 years, is technology is creating these what are sometimes referred to as platforms. These are enablers for change of other kinds. The one that gets pointed to most frequently is the creation of the iPhone back in 2007. And if we think about how much of the day and how much time and how much information that we receive from our mobile devices, it starts to paint a picture of how rapidly things can change. Another element, and this is a relatively new one, I would say more like last 5 years or so, is the progress that's taken place in relation to artificial intelligence. There's some new methodologies and some old methodologies that have just been enabled by the lower cost of technology, the availability of cloud platforms and other sharing of resources that have started to accelerate the process by which some of these technologies can impact healthcare as well as other organizations. What that's meant is that there's been a big premium placed on organizational learning, organizations' ability to adapt more rapidly to the external environment as the external environment is changing. So you see a few graphics in here. There's a graphic related to what's the National Academy of Medicine. Science and Medicine now refers to as the Learning Healthcare Organization, and different approaches that can be used to help inform when data and when research starts to suggest better ways of doing things, how do we more rapidly turn that into common practice? In addition to that, we have a couple of other graphics that I just threw in there related to new approaches to things like the lower right-hand one is innovation tournaments. This is an approach to taking a look at the front line and empowering them to identify ideas that can then be efficiently whittled down into the most promising opportunities to improve care or to improve efficiency and the like. The other one that I'll quickly mention is a lot of organizations, and let me give props to Cleveland Clinic because they were one of the first really to put this out there in a big way, but adapting or adopting approaches to innovation that not just involve things like testing out new technologies or testing out new approaches in a pilot fashion, but more actively looking at ways to partner with the innovative community or the innovation ecosystem in ways where the health systems can benefit from those improvements, both financially as well as from an efficiency perspective. So that's one area. The next area under this trend one is continuous employment requiring continuous learning. If you think about everything I just described related to the individual employee, what we're starting to see, and we're anticipating this accelerating, is an evolution in the nature of jobs themselves. I'm going to come back to this in just a minute in talking about the health professions. But what we're likely to see is a lot more fundamental change in the nature of people's work evolving over time. If you look at this in relation to what's happened in the higher education space, and that's that trend graph there, people look at that graph and they sometimes assume that that quick trend, the red one at the top is healthcare, because we all have heard by now that healthcare is kind of a cost challenge that's been running out of control. That's actually the higher education line. It's the one area of the economy that's had a harder time even than healthcare in controlling its costs. So this idea that individual employees could be responsible for their own retraining and re-education, employers are waking up to the reality that this is not going to work. So what we're starting to see is a lot more interest in work-based learning. And that's what some of the graphics right below there look like. There's companies like LinkedIn that have been developing or identifying learning platforms that can do not just pushing out of learning content, but also active credentialing. So if you think about LinkedIn Learning, what somebody can do if their employer gives them a license or subscription to the LinkedIn Learning is not just learn these new skills, but get a micro badge that can go right onto their LinkedIn platform. It becomes what's sometimes referred to as a micro credential, and it's portable. It goes with them if they leave the employer and they go somewhere else. The other examples you see here, there's one that I like from Penn Medicine. Penn Medicine took a look at what was happening with the contraction of the retail industry in the Philadelphia market. They looked at the skill sets associated with retail professionals, and they said, you know, we could create a career pathway into some of our frontline positions, patient service techs and the like, that could really help people find their way into these new roles and also help us fill them. Very successful program. That too, I'm happy to send other information about. The other quick one I want to mention is the impact of environmental uncertainties. This is a very complex problem, climate change, and the health and social determinants impact. We're anticipating that the health systems are going to be looked to more and more frequently by their communities to participate, if not lead, those adaptive solutions. I promised to go a little quicker on these next trends, but that one I think was important to dive into in a little more depth. If we could go over to trend number 2 now. Thank you. So chances are you've heard a little bit about this emphasis of health systems increasingly on social determinants of health. This really started with the Affordable Care Act back in 2012 and the expectation that health systems were starting to analyze their communities through a health needs assessment and a health investment or a health improvement plan. What we're anticipating going forward, if you look at the resources that health systems have in relation to the other community-facing nonprofits and other enablers and capacity builders, the health systems have a lot to bring to the table, but they absolutely can't be the ones that lead or do everything. What we're starting to see is a lot more thoughtful and smart alignment and investment in resources in ways where the health systems aren't necessarily doing all of the work, but they may be coordinating important work to improve things like issues like homelessness, if they're able to draw the line in a data-driven way between the impact of having stable housing and health-related outcomes. So you see at the lower right, there's a graphic here that I've been presenting occasionally related to this group called the Healthcare Anchor Network. And the concept of Healthcare Anchor is one where the health systems are looking beyond the slender margins that they're able to carve out and have for investment. And they're looking at things like their spend on payroll or their spend on supply chain. And they're asking the questions, are there opportunities to build our local communities that we might enrich through a more thoughtful approach to how we're spending on the expense side? So buy local, you have there. Impact investing is another example. Here in Chicago, Rush set aside a part of its investment portfolio. They still need to make returns on it, but they're starting to look beyond just the returns, and they're starting to say, are there things we could invest in, like housing and the like, that might also contribute in some fashion to these social determinants. So that last one then, broadening inter-organizational collaborations. This is kind of evolving what these look like over time. Let's head over now to trend number 3. One more click. There we go. Trend number 3, we have been calling consumers as professional partners. Now, if we think about what we were talking about just a minute ago related to the expansion of artificial intelligence and decision support systems, we're going to increasingly see those resources being pushed beyond the clinician and directly to the consumer. So if you think about, a starting point might be telemedicine or telemediated resources. On the left-hand side there, you see a kiosk of various kinds where somebody might pull a diagnostic device, and then on the right-hand side, you can see an example of them talking to a clinician. I'm providing this, by the way, as an example. This specific pilot, I think, has been set aside, but these experiments are continuing, and as they start to work better and better, I think we'll see more and more of them. We'll also start to see more and more of an influx of those decision support systems being able to directly serve the patients. This does not, from what we can tell, mean that the need for clinicians is going to go away, but it is going to de-emphasize the expertise of the individual clinician as the key differentiator. What we see happening over time is a rising role of the relationship, and you think of the clinician as an expert navigator rather than an expert, somebody who can help the patients to understand and interpret the information that they're getting out of the various new resources they have available to them, but the quality of the relationship really being the key differentiator. So let's now move on to that trend 4. This will be our last trend. This is one we originally called broadening and integrating of engagement. Another way that I might describe this one is a blurring of the lines between patients or customers, depending on what kind of an organization you work with, and employees. What used to be the case is you would have a focus on patient experience that would happen in one part of the organization, a focus on employee experience and employee engagement in the other. Increasingly, there's a dialogue happening between those two functions, or in some cases, like the University of California, San Francisco, they're starting to fall under the same roof. What's starting to happen, just to give you a couple of quick examples, if you think about the health systems as a platform for supporting and improving health and health-related outcomes, so we're tying together here this concept of social determinants. We're tying together this idea of community quarterback or community enabler. What that starts to mean is the health system needs to be a role model, not just in how you coordinate this on behalf of the outside community, but also on what that inside community, the employees themselves, look like and feel like and how they are doing. And so a lot of health systems are starting to look at, okay, well, if we need to be about health and health promotion, we need to start with our own employees. We need to think about what that relationship looks like. Similarly, we have a lot of organizations that are starting to evolve that look very different than the health systems that we've been familiar with in the past. We have, for example, some large employers in the form of J.P. Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon that are starting to look at models where they might own and control a health system, or at minimum a payer. We have organizations like the retail CVS clinics coming together with Aetna and Insurer. So different experiments with different models for what this might look like. So likely to see evolution in the past, also likely to see these blurred boundaries, especially as organizations, including the health systems, start to get larger over time. So if you could click to the next slide, what we've been doing and the purpose of doing a look into the future like this is we want to take a look at leadership and leadership competencies and make sure that graduate programs, make sure that leadership development programs and the like are doing what they need to do to prepare leaders to be effective in the future. So the project that we took on was to take a look at leadership competencies. This involves some in-depth interviews with incumbents in various roles. We typically will look at folks who are performing effectively, and we look to see if particularly high performance contrasts with typical performance. And then we look at different aspects of the ecosystem within healthcare. If we go to the next slide, the revised NCHL competency model you can see here at a very high level. I just want to say a couple of quick things about this model. If folks are interested in a deeper dive on this, there is a white paper now available. We also have a publication that's in the process of working its way through peer review that takes a look at how this model relates to the leadership competency models that are out there for nursing and medicine and as many other healthcare groups as we could get our hands around. But you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, and this is a leadership development model as much as a competency model. What we're trying to create here is a common platform where people who have leadership roles or leadership positions can come together on a common definition. So at the top, we have what we refer to as the action and competency domains. These are things that are evident on the job and they're developed on the job. In the area below, the enabling competency domains, these are the ones that are developed either through higher education or through reflection or through activities that involve looking at the work rather than doing the work. This is a science-based model, so a lot of what you see here is really informed by meta-analyses that are coming not necessarily just out of healthcare, but it's a broad look across the social sciences disciplines that do work in leadership and leadership development. So if I give you a quick description, and hopefully this resonates pretty quickly with folks, but you can see on the upper left there, there's an execution domain. This is getting the work done. Relations domain is working effectively with other people to in pursuit of those shared goals. So if I pause even right there, you can think about this being an important balancing act. If somebody is too far on the execution side, they're not paying enough attention and focus on relations. What they can end up with is effectiveness in the short term, but a lot of difficulties in the long term, or a lot of expense in terms of finding and training new staff. But the opposite is also true. A leader can be too lopsided on the relation side, too worried about having the difficult conversations. And in those types of situations, execution may not be where it needs to be. So it's an important balance as well, a set of competencies. We could say the same about transformation. Transformation is taking this, the current operating platform and moving it into the future. And there's a relations piece associated with that, which is helping people to understand why the current system isn't going to take us into the future effectively. But similarly there, leaders can be too focused on the transformation piece, not enough focused on getting the trains running on time in the present state. We also see this sometimes with leaders who maybe don't have as clear or as consistent a focus on what that future vision looks like. And people look like it's flavor of the week, and they can potentially just wait it out and it'll go away. Boundary spanning, my quick description of that would be the relationship between what a leader does internally and how they relate their department, division, organization, health system alike to the outside world. This shows up in terms of a set of competencies needed for all the things related to the community, the social determinants, as well as ensuring that the adaptation that's needed at a department or divisional level is tracking with what's going on at the health system level. And then enabling down at the bottom, self-awareness, self-development, I see as kind of core to the chaplaincy profession. So I won't elaborate too much on that one, but it's this idea really of having an understanding of oneself and how they come across to others, managing one's own emotions, using them to the most efficient and effective effect. Health system awareness and business literacy really relates to the effective use of resources, money, people, data. These would be information technology, human resource management, financial management. And then the last one, values. The quick thing I'll mention about that, and this is an important one related to leadership development, is, and I would assume that this is true of chaplains as well, if a chaplain moves from a direct service role into a management role, what we're talking about is a need for a reorientation or a shifting to some degree in values. And especially, I think a good way to think about this is like if I'm a clinician and I'm working with an individual patient, while that patient is in my office, they're my primary, they're almost the entirety of my focus. How do I help this person? How do I marshal resources to get them the help that they need? When I put my manager hat on, I need to put that individual patient aside, and I need to have a focus on how do I best steward a finite set of resources to maximize and optimize the outcomes for a population that the department or the organization is serving. So I wanted to leave at least a minute or two for Daniel to talk a little bit about what we're finding as we're applying this model to chaplaincy leaders. So let me turn things now over to Daniel, and if we could shoot forward just one more slide.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Like Andy said, I'll take a couple of minutes to discuss a little bit on the project that we're currently working on. So the working title of this project is called The Management and Leadership Competencies Among Spiritual Care Managers. And the purpose of this project was for us to examine the competencies required for effective spiritual care program leadership. Specifically, we sought to validate the NCHL competency model that Andy has described in a sample of spiritual care department managers. So with the assistance from the Transforming Chaplaincy Advisory Group, 10 managers from 5 different organizations were contacted and got scheduled with individualized hour-long interviews within a 3 weeks. Single interviewer, which was me, using a behavioral event interviewing methodology, conducted all 10 interviews, and there were 2 main components to it. The first part consisted of explaining a few background questions about the nature of their work, such as their current job titles, primary goals, their roles, and etc. The second and main part consisted of managers identifying 3 critical incidents in which they thought the outcome was favorable and 3 critical incidents in which they thought the outcome could have been more favorable. So 4 questions were asked for favorable outcome critical incidents, and those questions were 1, what was the situation you were facing? 2, what was the task that you were trying to accomplish? 3, what actions did you take? And 4, what were the results of these actions? And on the other hand, 5 questions were asked for unfavorable outcome critical incidents, and those questions were 1, what was the situation you were facing? 2, what was the task you were trying to accomplish? 3, what actions did you take? 4, what were the results of these actions? And 5, if you found yourself in the same situation again, what actions would you take this time, and how might they affect results differently? So with the consent of the interviewees, all interviews were audio recorded and then transcribed, yielding a total of 175 individually quotable behavior descriptions. Descriptions were reviewed against the current version of the NCHL competency model, and where possible, statement matches were coded according to the current competencies and level within competency by a human coder. To verify the matching process, a separate coding was completed by a natural language processing coder. So the headline, what you guys are seeing right now at the PowerPoint slide, sorry, can you go back another slide? I don't think this slide is. Thank you. So this is the results section of the project that we're working on. So the headline is the chaplaincy manager's descriptions of the roles mapped reliably to the NCHL model, suggesting that this model could be used to characterize the competencies critical to success. And the slide that you're seeing right now is the proportions of descriptions that are mapped to each of the 7 domains that Andy just described. So about a third of the descriptions are related to the execution domain, and the next largest was relations. These results track well with other clinical disciplines, where we often find these 2 domains to be the most central to the leadership. The focus on boundary spending and values was somewhat lower than we expected, and we believe that the boundary spending in particular may be an area that can benefit from more development in the chaplaincy management profession. So this is just a brief overview of the result section of what we're doing right now for this project, and now I'll hand it back over to Ed.
Daniel, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and wrap here, but I first want to do a quick commercial for the upcoming certificate program in spiritual care management and leadership. This is the joint venture between my health systems management department and the transforming chaplaincy department. You have some more information about that, but we are looking to take this research, take the work of transforming chaplaincy, and turn it into a program that can really help current and future chaplaincy leaders, not only to be more effective in their current roles, but also to start to cultivate a national network that can help to take the profession forward. And I'm really excited to be working with George and the team on that. Thank you so much for your time today. I think we turn now things over to you, Amy.
Well, thank you. This is incredibly exciting, and all I can think is, where have you guys been all my life? A lot of this, unfortunately, a lot of this is stuff that many of us just had to learn by the seat of our pants. I was actually wondering where that phrase came from, and looked it up shortly before the webinar, and it's from aviation, which people took off with not very many instruments and not very many not much guiding equipment. And I feel like a lot of us ended up in similar circumstances when we went into chaplaincy and even education, even CPE and other forms of education, not really knowing that a lot of us were going to be called upon, and nobody could have predicted, I don't think, how fast and furious the changes in healthcare would be, and would continue to be, as you've well laid out. I'm very excited about what you're doing, because I think, just as a personal aside, I've reported up through 4 different structures in my 11 years at the Cleveland Clinic. So I think having people have multiple models for how to do this, and having as many things up their sleeve as they can to understand how organizations shift and change, can only help us move move forward. I'm wondering if either you or Daniel would be willing to comment on, I mean, I'm thrilled about the certificate program, and I'm looking at my calendar the minute we get off to see if I can participate. I'm wondering if there are other alternatives to a program of this length that you gentlemen have some ideas about in terms of just maybe a way to get some advice and information from those of you who are studying this more closely in a more targeted way. Like people could have a specific question, because everything you've pointed out is absolutely, in my experience, what's required of us, how we have to change our approach, how we have to often sort of not quite give up our values, but kind of put them in the back seat for a little bit to make sure that the work keeps going ahead and that we don't fall off the radar with all the other things going on in healthcare. Is there a way that we could have maybe quicker access to some of that wisdom? I don't know if that's a fair question on a live webinar, but that's what occurs to me personally.
Gosh, that is a great question, and it is, kind of the core focus of my work these days is trying to develop resources that can get out to the field to help build this bridge to what is known about leadership and leadership development, but has, and this isn't chaplaincy, this is the entire healthcare industry. For all of its focus on evidence-based approaches, the 100-year-long history of leadership development research has largely been ignored. I'm actually quoting the editor of BMJ Leader, which is a new journal that has a focus on this issue, and saying that he in his titular article said, leadership development, an evidence-free zone? ? So all of that is just to buy myself a little time to try and come up with an answer for you. I do think that there are probably some resources within the chaplaincy profession already that maybe there's some ways that through this partnership we can start to cultivate and create direct access. I'm certainly happy to explore them, and if there's other resources that you or George can or Giela can suggest, George knows where to find me.
Great, because like I said, with a lot of my time has been spent adapting to 4 different reporting structures and just educating, like in a very secular research-based hospital, just educating my own bosses about who we are and what we do. And like you said, getting around to the higher level thinking sometimes is quite a challenge. But this just feels like I'm excited about the network that you're building of conversation partners and sharing of resources. So I think this is essential to our survival and even thriving going forward. I don't know about you, but I'd love to hear the questions from any of the other viewers. I know we're moving along, but I have others. So do you want to see if the public has some questions first, and then? Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
If folks have questions, there's the Q&A box at the bottom. And so we have our first question from Anna Kendig, posted. Daniel, I'd be interested in what you have to say more about your study results as far as implications. I heard you mention the values and boundary spanning were below what was expected. Do you think this is due to how chaplain leaders are operating or how they're enabled by the system, a lack of awareness, or should they expect a published paper in the pipeline?
Well, first of all, I don't know if there is a published paper in the pipeline, to be honest with you. I think one of the reasons while I was conducting an interview is, the reasons as stated here is because the way or how chaplain leaders are operating. Obviously with the 10 chaplaincy managers that I interviewed, there were various levels within those chaplaincy managers, right? There were some that just got into their position compared to people that had been in that position for a very long time. So depending on which level they were currently at while I was conducting that interview, I think that could have played a significant role when it comes to finding the result of how values and boundary spanning were in a level that was somewhat below that we expected.
Yeah, I might add a quick comment about that. And again, this is not chaplaincy profession specific. I would say maybe it's clinician specific. So I'll throw myself into this category as somebody who started as a clinical psychologist and learned management, like so many of us, the hard way. But you know, even in organizations that have pretty good management education internally, the management education tends to be focused on, you know, what are the challenges that the organization feels in the aggregate. And so, you know, the training can be addressed accordingly. And so I've seen health systems, for example, start a management program because they're having challenges with union organizing, or they're having challenges with turnover. These are very important management issues and management considerations, and there are very good skills that can be learned to address those. But for the individual manager who's looking at how do I make my department more effective, or how do I raise visibility, or some of these more nuanced leadership skills, sometimes I think these get underserved in a lot of healthcare contexts. And this is the kind of thing that we're trying to get better at in terms of like this certificate program that we're putting together. And again, if the Transforming Chaplaincy community is interested in other vehicles that might work, webinars or what have you, this is definitely something I'd be very happy to explore with George and with colleagues.
Thank you, Andy. One of the questions that popped up on the chat here is, there are a handful of certificate programs that exist out there that work on spiritual care management. Can you talk about why the program that you all have developed at Rush is unique, and why it's suited for chaplains to consider as an option for learning and growth?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I should say again, I'm not in the chaplaincy profession. I confess I'm a bit of an interloper. So I don't have clear visibility into if there are a number of other chaplaincy management programs out there. The ones that I have seen, I think they have a good skills focus to them. I certainly wouldn't say that they're necessarily bad programs. If I was to describe what differentiates what George and I are trying to do the most, it really is as much about developing this national network as it is about the skill development. Now, yes, we're taking an approach that's a little bit of a more strategic level in terms of thinking about how do we influence and how do we affect change. I think the partnership with the Health Systems Management Department may bring some expertise that perhaps some of the other programs don't have as much depth in. But I would say probably if there is a difference, it is that effort to tie into creating something that's larger than the individuals who are participating, and also creating something that's enduring.
Mm-hmm. I would add that one of the benefits of what you all are doing is that you come from the perspective as healthcare service administration, and not necessarily from the perspective of chaplains. And in my own learning, and I have said this to many others, it's been helpful to learn from other people from within the discipline of healthcare, but do not have the same background to sort of challenge the assumptions that we might have. So in that sense, I think that what you all are offering might also provide a new lens of understanding of what healthcare leadership is like.
Thank you.
We've got a few more minutes, and so I'm going to take a couple more questions. One from Bill Foster. With the rapid shifting of healthcare from acute to non-acute care settings, how might we better address care across the continuum when the current structures make it very difficult to do so?
I think that's a great question, and I think, and again, I'm a naive kind of outsider looking in, so take everything I say with an appropriate grain of salt. I don't know what I'm talking about at the end of the day, but what I would say from the broader clinical perspective is, to the extent that there is need and value, if we circle back to one of the trends that we talked about in terms of the relationship being the differentiator, more so in the future than the expertise. There are technology platforms around what comes out of the sales side, customer relationship management and the like. I think what we're going to need to do, and when I say we, I mean all clinicians, is start to think differently, start to think innovatively about how do we maintain a relationship across multiple modalities with a client or a patient population. And so what it may mean is some of the interaction, if it used to all be face-to-face or in person, some of it needs to move to other like telemediated types of approaches. And it may be that we need to be investigating different electronic systems that can help manage that process and that pipeline of interaction in ways that take some of that complexity, logistics, scheduling off of our plates to keep our focus on the interaction with the patients.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback on that for just a second, I really agree with that. I think one of the strengths we have as chaplains is our relationship building. I mean, I always tell people around here of other professions, that's all we've got. I mean, that's a little oversimplified, but it is one of our big gifts, and it's something we spend a lot of our time and training on. And I'm excited to hear you say that that's going to end up having more, more, I'm hearing it to be more glue going forward than even certain kinds of expertise, because as you said, expertise today can be totally obsolete by tomorrow with some of the changes and as fast and furious as they come. So I think as chaplains, we can really contribute to, from whatever standpoint of leadership we hold within our organizations, we can really contribute to that dialogue about the team approach. And even something else you said about the the boundary between patients and employees. Several years ago, the Cleveland Clinic started calling every one of us a caregiver. There was a big campaign so that even if you sat at a desk at a call center 20 miles off main campus, you were also a caregiver, because your voice, might be the very first contact someone had with the Cleveland Clinic. And people really have responded to that well and risen to that occasion and seen themselves as part of the team in a way that I really think is changing things and is following some of what you're talking about in terms of the trends of the future. Our new CEO was just in Forbes, I think this morning, to talk about the way the clinic uses the team approach. And I have really found that to be true. And that way we can sort of spread our influence, I think, a lot better by forming those relationships and having our particular unique qualities that we can contribute to the conversation, to staff care, to patient care. We just have to be strategic about where we place our efforts. But I was excited to hear some of your explanation of the trends, because I think that in some ways there's some good news in there for us, even if we're a tiny minority.
So Amy, I think you're spot on, and what I would suggest, as we talk about change and the like being somewhat can feel very overwhelming, but I would say more than any other profession perhaps, chaplaincy has the opportunity in the future to expand rather than shrink its mandate. And there's been some press I know about like congregations shrinking and the like. Existential crises are a growth industry.
That's right.
I don't mean to laugh, but the existential challenges haven't gone away. If anything, they've started to expand. There's a great quote from somebody who I respected very much, psychologist Harry Levinson, who did all of his work in organizations, and it goes something like this: every change involves loss, and every loss requires grieving. And if you look through that lens and the challenges that all employees, in addition to all patients, are facing, it does, to me, point towards the possibility of an even broader role for chaplaincy in the future, even if it looks different.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm always saying the same thing, like there's plenty of suffering to go around. And the good thing about being chaplains is we are mobile. We'll always have a need for the psychologists and the counselors. I mean, there's plenty of work for everybody, but we're the ones who are free to drop what we're doing and go. And that way we're sort of, I think we have a lot of freedom that we don't always tap into. I was also interested in your comment about technology, because we're about to launch a pilot here where the chaplains are actually doing virtual visits. And we're also doing another one where chaplains will get called in for end-of-life conversations with a physician partner that are now billable. And we won't be personally billing, but we are just making ourselves more valuable to the institution by doing some of the tasks that, frankly, I don't see a lot of the other professions lining up to have the end of life conversations. And those are things that actually as chaplains we're pretty good at. So I think there's ways that we can make ourselves even more valuable to the institution if we just know how and where and how to target our efforts. And stuff like this really helps.
If I could add a comment around that as it relates to palliative care, and again with my healthcare management hat on, there is no bigger source of needless expense or expense reduction opportunity that the health systems have identified than the over expenditure on this kind of mad dash at the end of life.
That's right.
There's a lot of interest in having a more rational approach to helping people with end of life care. I don't see how you get there without the chaplaincy profession, quite honestly.
I don't either.
Well, that is a good place to end, unfortunately, today. And there are lots of questions that we didn't get to, and I apologize to everyone. But thank you, Andy and Daniel and Amy, for being a part of this conversation and being here with us today. We sincerely appreciate the time that you've invested in this with us. And I just want to share a little bit more with all of you. We have, again, the new certificate program that Rush is working on. But there's also Transforming Chaplaincies continuing to do some of the work they've been doing, and I will get the technology to work with me. There we go. We are hopefully share something new with you guys. There's additional and ongoing work that's being done within the Transforming Chaplaincy group to let's see if I can get this to actually participate. Can you guys see this new slide? So there's the new research literacy or ongoing research literacy summer institute that's happening in Chicago this summer. If you'd like to continue to do that, that will be July 26th or 22nd through the 26th. And hopefully that slide will pop up for you guys. If you have questions, contact Michael Skaggs at Brandeis. And then second, we also will have 2 ongoing online research literacy courses that will be available in winter 2019. And contact Michael for that, or Andy. We'll be sending out this information with the slides as well. And finally, our next session will be on March 28th. And we look forward to having you join us as we talk about staff support. And thank you, and sorry we went over, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That sounded like a wrap.
I hope so. Hi, did you guys get all that? Are we still recording, Carl?
No. All right. All righty, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Class dismissed.
Thank you, guys. I
Thanks.
will talk to you all later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.